Hi, I'm Steve Wright, Projects Director at TTSP Architecture and Design London. I'm also Chair of the CoreNet London Workplace Committee. This report is on behalf of the London Wellbeing team as part of the COVID-19 Hackathon Challenge. Our team's submission is a result of wide-ranging discussion on the topic of workplace wellbeing both during and after the current pandemic. It brings together input from employers, occupiers, advisors, strategists, and all of us as individuals. Its experiences and views are formed from a UK perspective. The content is set out to establish the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic and its ongoing impact, the stages of transition back to normality, and the perspectives of the employer, staff, landlords, and individuals in the process. It goes on to consider the reshaping of operations and longer-term measures, future considerations and implications before concluding with recommendations for future strategy. In each section, we've aimed to provide a concise background statement supported by forecasts and recommendations, and I would say that the whole team has really enjoyed working on this project. In order to establish a context, our proposition was formed from discussion. In terms of background, we would say that the world is in the grip of an unprecedented pandemic. Many countries have enforced lockdown measures restricting the movement of people. This has moved the location of work from shared offices to the homes of employees. The COVID-19 pandemic will have long-lasting psychological effects. Wellbeing of staff is critical in the present time and will be reframed under the new normal. So one of the key things that we discovered is that the traditional wellbeing elements related to workplace environment are not within the control of the employer at this time. So air, nutrition, light, water, the other things we would take for granted inside a work environment are now not there to control. So mind is the remaining channel, and that can be accessed via communication. We discovered that what we needed to ask was how effective the business continuity plan has been in terms of well-being. Do the provisions extend to maintaining well-being to an extended remote working scenario, so decentralization of well-being factors? How do we get back to normal, and what is the new normal? What lessons can we learn to inform our current actions and future strategy? How do we create our strategy to deal with return to work whilst keeping safe? What impacts will this have on the well-being provisions we've made up until now? There's a lot to consider there and a lot to answer, but in terms of a context, that does establish our starting point. In the second phase of our discussion, we moved on to the phased return to workplace and the transition stage. So national governments will be dictating the return to work as lockdowns are eased, or possibly reinstated should there be a second spike in the illness. Social distancing guidelines will dictate workplace and commuting decisions for employers and employees. And the pandemic will have long-lasting psychological effects, as we've already mentioned. In terms of the forecasts, it is a major health phenomenon and will affect people physically and mentally. And we can see that it's going to carry on until the end of 2020 at the very earliest. But the mental impact of that may run on a bit longer. So there will be a number of concerns from staff. There'll be a number of practical measures from employers looking to get back to the world of normality. In terms of some of the highlights of our recommendations, we would suggest recognising and sharing the trauma of the pandemic as a first stage of re-engagement with people, allowing time for people to readjust, to address individual experiences and the collective issues that we face going forward. One of the most interesting things was to expect the unexpected. We don't quite know what is going to be thrown our way, but we need to try and be ready for it. And I think that everyone would agree in terms of the readiness. Generally, globally, it hasn't been fantastic in terms of a response. People may be expecting free issue of PPE and sanitisation elements on their return to work. We need to think about these fears as well, and to really make sure that staff are engaged with the process and do know what's going on. When we start to consider the transition measures that may be necessary, staff will be immensely health aware, as we've said. They will expect workplaces to manage the potential spread of COVID-19 and other HSSE type risks. So it's going to be looking at items like reducing infection rates and keeping people segregated in line with the social distancing policy as far as can be achieved. In terms of forecasting this, workplaces must amend their facilities management practices in the short and longer term. FM changes must make things better for the largest percentage of the workforce. Some of the measures may include health testing, screening, temperature checks on the way in, one-way systems, use of stairs, and all the other segregation elements that I'm sure lots of people will have been focusing on in the market at the moment. To move on to the different perspectives of the stakeholders involved in this whole workplace equation and the wellbeing part of it, we start with the employer's perspective. There will be a new context to managing employee performance and wellbeing during and after this pandemic. There will be more employees who want to work remotely, and these people may be seen less physically in the workplace. Neurodiversity is an important consideration on behalf of those people, because not everyone is the same and people will react differently to certain other things. Some people will want more physical and less emotional assurance, and vice versa. This is where communications platforms can come in very strongly to reinforce and support what employers and organisations are doing, and to see what the best means is of re-engaging with the staff. We do think, in terms of sticking with the mental health aspects, that it may be important to consider a proactive mental health intervention rather than relying on people being self-reporting. So this could include mental health coordinators, first aiders, and buddy systems for people to make sure it's inclusive and engaging. But perhaps most importantly, employers will need to consider whether or not there will be a decision point on whether working habits have been transformed permanently. Are the existing trends for remote working going to accelerate, meaning planning assumptions for workplaces should be reviewed and likely reset? So a big question for employers. From a staff perspective, staff continuing to work and returning to work will have health and well-being concerns, as we've mentioned before. They will have experience shaped by remote working and have a valid perspective on the work-life balance and its mental implications. They may have a view on how they work best, how they perform to their most effective levels. And these facts may influence future decision-making on their own and on employers' behalves. But the pandemic, perhaps in terms of the biggest forecast, may be a shift for the work-life balance, with staff questioning how they want to work and therefore looking for the employers who are going to provide them with that kind of choice. And this is about staying sane at all times. So employers really do need to create or update the wellbeing awareness program to get people to engage with that, to consider existing provisions on certain other areas of the building as well. So if people are not taking the tube, they may be using bikes, so more pressure on showers and the physical environment elements. From a landlord's perspective, landlords will want to keep hold of tenants and also to make sure that they're providing safe workplaces. So there's a number of measures that they can actually take. Firstly is to engage with the occupier and see what it is the building is delivering. And then there's going to be a whole range of sanitisation measures and other things that need to be done. So perhaps that's going to extend out into building services, into HVAC, looking at viral spread concerns and filtration and deep cleaning of systems on a very regular basis. This is going to be of particular interest to co-location landlords where those amenities are shared. Everyone's going to have an input. From the individual perspective, most people will have a unique opportunity to explore their own version of a good work-life balance and what it doesn't look like as well. So there may be some more discerning people who actually are looking for significant change in when and how they work and how they engage with their employer. So being aware of information available to manage my own health and sanity are very important to me, and that really does need to come from the employer and not just be reliant upon media channels. So what are the reshaping measures and the long-term things that we really need to think about? So the conclusion of the return to work phase is not the end of the COVID-19 impact. Work will change as a direct result of these factors and new learned behaviours. So we do recognise that the existing workplace design norms will change and many space efficiency measures will enter a regression phase. So the max packing of people and spreading people out. There needs to be, there's very likely to be some societal changes, accelerated changes in that factor, and there does need to be a channel to engage and participate with people going through those changes, and to see how this could be best delivered and maybe perceived as an employee benefit. In terms of our future considerations, really this is about engagement between workforce and all the other stakeholders. People do need to stay sane. Employers will not want to lose their great people, and to get them back into a very productive and new normal environment.